Good afternoon, everyone. I hope my sound is audible to you. So let us start having a discussion on a bridge course for grade 7 in the subject of science. So we know that this bridge course serves as a bridging link between grade 6 and grade 7. So much of the activities will find that they are in coordination with what they have already learned in grade 7 with grade 6 and what they are going to learn in grade 7. So let us see one by one the different activities of this particular bridge course. There are total 15 activities and that need to be prepared in the month of April for the 4 weeks. So as per your pace, you can do this particular activities.
To which ways to the reply?
So the first activity here is litmus paper test. That is by using red or blue litmus paper. The curricular goals which are basically catering to this is CG1, CG6 also it is there. Some curricular goals and competencies I will add on. If you want, you can just particularly note down that CG1, CG6 and also CG7. Just at start of the activities, I will mention certain competencies which basically are catering to it, and I will read that. That is C1.1, wherein the classification will happen based on the observable physical and chemical characteristics. The next competency related to CG6, that is competency 6.2, wherein student formulates question using scientific terminology. That is also catering to this particular activity. Another particular competency, that is competency 7.1, which talks about using scientific vocabulary to communicate inferences and ideas about science in the form of oral and written form. So all these particular competencies are catering to this particular activities, that is competency 1.1, competency 6.2 and competency 7.1. The major outcome which basically we are seeing to this particular activity, the students will observe the change in the color, then they will identify the change in the color of litmus paper, that is observation, identification and classification. That is what is our major goal in this. So we are developing the observation skill at the same time their classification skill in this particular context. So the instructional materials basically will be the litmus paper strip, which will be by teachers to the student. This can be done in the form of a group activity. This can be done in the form of a group activity either, or maybe it can be done individually also. So if you see in this particular case, what basically teacher is going to do is, basically teacher is going to provide them with a red and blue litmus paper strip, and students are going to observe the color change. Okay, and in this particular context, directly we are not going to tell them that this is acid and read at start only. Let the student reflect upon and let them first observe the color change, that is the litmus paper of blue turning to red or red turning to blue, or maybe that there will be certain cases where there will be no color change. And then at the later context, you can just put in the minds of the student this concept of acid, basis and neutral solution. Because you know that in 7th standard again you are going to continue with this particular lesson. So just to bridge that particular thing, and they know this particular part is there for this particular type, it is this particular application. Okay, so the observation table is given below. These are just the suggestive samples which are given. Depending on your class size, you can go on adding different particular samples and let the student observe the color change and of the blue litmus paper and red litmus paper. One particular twist you can give to this particular activity is after performing this particular activity, you can make students to form a group depending on the color which basically they see. So in that particular context, you can give student one particular item, okay, and let them try to test it with the blue and red litmus paper, and with the type of color change they observe, let them form a group. So A will have all the samples that have turned blue litmus paper red. Group B has the samples that have turned red litmus paper blue, and Group C may have a sample that do not affect any of the two litmus paper. So such particular thing will put in the minds of the student permanently this classification, where at times it becomes confusing in their minds when they see this particular color change. So it becomes a very important and concrete particular activity wherein we are developing the observation skill. At the same time, the retention part mind the student will also go on improving in this particular context. So this is the first activity. To that, we can always have a supplementary activity if time permits to you. You can, instead of litmus paper, another activity you can conduct, that is two supplementary activity which is mentioned here. That is a red cabbage activity, wherein they are going to prepare this indicator by chopping the red cabbage and boiling it in water for around 15 minutes and then straining this particular liquid into the cup. And the same way, like above, they can do this particular activity wherein they are going to put this particular red cabbage indicator drop in our samples, and they are going to test the color change. So that's where we will find when the students are doing this, that is demonstration by group of students or maybe an individual student, and they are trying to figure it out the nature of different samples with the blue and paper. So the observation which we are going to do as a teacher, that could be taken as assessment part for this particular activity. I hope this particular activity is clear in your mind. This is activity 1. Activity is activity 2, which speaks about carbon dioxide in exhaled air. So this particular activity again caters to the curricular goal 1, along with that curricular goal 6 and curricular goal 7. Here it caters to the competency from curricular goal 1, the competency 1.2, which says identifies and differentiate the changes. Then competency 2 from curricular goal 6, which says formulating question, once again the same like above activity. And the competency 7.1 of curricular goal 7, which basically tells us that student uses scientific vocabulary to communicate inference and ideas of the science accurately, oral and written form. So more focus is on the communication from the students end, as we know that we are following here the constructivist approach where we are trying to tap on the students' mind, what they know, and then we are trying to link it. And that's how we are studying the bridge between the previous grade and the grade they are going to learn in the course of time. The expected outcome for this particular activity is basically we are going to teach them this particular preparation of lime water. We are also going to the students are going to observe the reaction of lime water with carbon dioxide. That is a major particular aim in this particular activity, and then students are going to explain they have observed. So for this particular case, you require this lime water which they need to prepare. Okay, so you can give them this particular calcium oxide powder, and which they are going to put it in water, and they are going to make this particular lime water, and it needs to be kept for a certain time undisturbed so that it gives us a clear solution. After that, a student in a group, they will take this 4 to 5 ml in a test tube, and then as this particular activity is done by you in a previous particular classes also, they are going to blow air to this particular with the help of a straw or a bend tube, and they are going to observe the change in the lime water. So once they observe the change in the lime water, you don't directly conclude that. You try to take the response from the student, what they have observed about that particular activity which they have done, and what type of guess may be the reason why it has happened. So like that discussion can be done on this particular activity so that it can be more interesting and more fruitfulness, and the competency which we say, wherein the students are trying to understand or communicate their inferences. That is 7.1, that can be catered to this particular activity in more particularly in a proper sense. So this particular activity can be done as a group activity so that it also can be seen. Then one assessment part is observation, how the students are doing, that is there. Along with that, you can add on with this particular, wherein you can make students to understand the different formulas of a compound substances. So a simple one, let them attempt carbon dioxide, water, calcium oxide, though may be difficult for them, but with your guidance, they can very well try to do this particular task of completing this particular table. Along with that, just to give them an idea or a hint at start that there are certain chemical reactions for that. Specifically, this particular part was good, that is complete the given chemical reaction, wherein they are going to complete this particular chemical reaction and understand how this particular things work, how a plant or water has turned milky because of what? That this particular chemical reaction. So that can be the assessment part, so that we are catering to all the levels of the student in a classroom. So since it is group activity, a mixed grouping will always be a better case in this particular context. The third activity is just like the first activity, wherein we are talking about turmeric as an indicator, but only here one particular thing before we go further with this particular activity. This particular turmeric as an indicator activity caters to curricular goal 1, along with that curricular goal 6 and curricular goal 7. The same like the litmus paper, where in curricular goal 1, competency 1.1, which speaks about classification, observable physical and chemical characteristics. At the same time, 6.2 competency, which speaks about formulating questions, and competency 7.1, which talks about communicating inferences in their own ideas, in their own particular words. So this also particular activity caters to that particular curricular goals and competencies. So outcome basically here is observing the student. The students will observe the effect of different substances on turmeric indicator, and they will record the color change of the turmeric paper. In this case, the instructional material, as you know, it is turmeric powder which we require, and water, paper strips, and acids and basis substances that are required. So here what we are going to do is, we are going to give them a particular task to prepare this turmeric paper strips. Okay, so they are going to first make this turmeric solution. They are going to dip this particular paper strip into it. They can draw designs also with respect to that particular strips when they are preparing it. And then they are going to test this particular turmeric paper with different particular samples. Certain samples of acids and certain samples of bases, so that they are much more trying to explore what basically changes they are trying to see in that particular context. This is just the observation table. The examples which are given of the samples are suggestive. Depending on the number of students and depending on your class size, you can try to add a different particular substances or samples. So the major task in this particular case is to check the color change. What color change the student try to find it out on their own particular indicator which they have developed. So in the first case, the ready-made indicator was given. The idea was to see how that indicator works. In this particular case, we are trying to concretize that particular idea that you can prepare an indicator and you can try to test in your own way the different samples, maybe in your household kitchen or like this particular things, the samples which I mentioned. Okay. So as per your convenience, you can give different samples and the students can try to note down that particular color change as their observation. So don't directly try to interfere with their observation at start. Guide them. You can tell them the color change and why it happens. That will be the last part in the constructivist plan, maybe constructivist lessons, where we see first we try to engage them, we try to explore that, and finally we try to go with the elaboration part. Okay, so that's what we need to do when we are conducting this particular activity. Assessment in this particular case, you can do one particular twist wherein you can have a classroom discussion along with this particular table which we find. Since it was a repetitive activity, just like the first one of the first paper, therefore this assessment was a little bit revised, wherein we are also trying to focus more. In assessment, we are observing the students, how they are making that particular turmeric paper, how the color changes they are trying to communicate us and how they are telling us. That is there, and along with that, we can have a discussion in a classroom on certain common edible substances which are there and what are the common acids or bases which are present in it. So we can give a list of common edible substances, okay, and then let them explore what type of acid that is present inside this particular common substances. Okay, you can give them a time frame wherein they can bring this particular thing into the classroom, maybe on the next day. Okay, like orange, amla, vinegar, or like that particular substances which basically they eat. That particular substances can be given as a list, or you can also give them a free hand wherein they can write about the common edible substances in their own, and they can just try to figure it out what acids are present inside this particular substances. So this we are giving them opportunity to also explore, which is basically mentioned in our CG6. Okay, that is one particular CG which it caters, where they are exploring the process of science. So that can be given this particular activity. The fourth activity is very interesting and which will be liked by most of the students. That is related to know your electrical components. This particular activity again touches upon certain curricular goals. That is curricular goal 2, curricular goal 5, curricular goal 6, and curricular goal 7. In this curricular goal 2, competency 2.2 indicators, which says student describes how electricity works through manipulating different elements in simple circuit. Then apply scientific knowledge in daily life, that is competency 5.1. Competency 6.2, formulating question using scientific terminology, and 7.2 again says representing ideas through diagrams or maybe through oral or visual communication. So this competencies, this particular activity is catering. Expected outcome of this particular activity is student will observe first the different electrical. They will try to identify what the names of different electrical components. At the same time, they are going to draw symbols of different electrical components. And at the same time, at last, you can also tasked to draw simple circuit based on the symbols basically which they have tried to figure it out. So this is basically the outcome which is expected through this particular activity. Here, teacher's duty is only to display different electrical components in the classroom. So you can display a series of electrical components like bulb, the switches, wire, and whatever it is required for forming a circuit. And then the student the electrical component at start, understand this particular description properly. They are going to observe this particular electrical for certain time. You can give them 5 to 10 minutes where they are going to observe. Then they are going to draw the simple diagram of each electrical component. In their own way, in a free way, whatever the electrical components they are seeing, they are trying to draw a simple diagram of that. And then the students, you can give them a facilitation and you can tell them one step ahead, and you can have also a small discussion over there. Now, suppose if we try to draw in the same way the components in the classroom and we want to form a particular we want to form a blueprint of this particular class. Okay, where all these different electrical components are there. Whether as it is, we can draw it. Like such particular question, you can pose, and then you can take them to a concept of symbols and let students first attempt to draw symbols in their own way. Okay, related to the cell, battery, maybe wire or bulb, a simple one, or a switch. Let them try to do it in their own way. This can be also a group activity that is think, pair, and share, like that activity. You can give it. You can give this particular activity, and then teacher can go around and have a look at the drawings. And if at all there is a correction which is needed, you can do the correction with respect to the symbol drawn. And then you can tell them finally to connect all these components and to form a simple circuit to that. So that is basically the idea. So we are slowly growing this particular concept. First we are showing them a component, then they are drawing that component, and after that they are drawing a symbol. And after drawing a symbol, then they are trying to component symbols, and they are trying to draw a simple circuit. This will be a very good good idea when it's connecting, wherein you'll find that this particular activity will always help you out when you are going to deal with the lesson on basically electric current and its effect in a particular context in grade 7. So these are the electrical components. This you already know about that, the diagram and symbol. So like this particular chart, they can prepare on their particular book and they will try to figure it out in their particular own way. And your duty as a teacher will be facilitating them to come to a correct symbols and correct electrical correct symbols at the same time, developing a proper simple circuit. That is your part from your end. Assessment will be when you are going to observe how the students are drawing a simple electrical circuit, You can take it one step ahead. If you want, you can have a visit to a nearby electrical item shop. That can be also given them as a task at home. Or if the nearby electrical shop item is there, then you can take them so that you are making them more curious about this particular activity. More curious about rather than electrical components. Okay, so they can see their various types of cells and other particular components which are there when they visit the electrical item. And then there could be a discussion wherein what type of particular components they have seen when they have visited this particular item. At the same time, you can have two to three variations wherein you can tell them to note down the gadgets in which different types of cells are used, like what type of cells are used in torches, locks, or maybe the simple AC remotes and the key remote of a vehicle, all these particular things, so that they know that the components maybe are of a similar type or of a similar nomenclature, but they sometimes are different in specification and also in the voltage, which basically is very important when it comes to this electrical components. So that's how this fourth activity is all about. That's related to electrical components. The fifth activity in this particular context is related to exploring conductors and insulators. So here, it is catering to CG1. Along with that, it is also catering to CG2, 6, and 7. The same like the previous one. Where in CG1, the competency 1.1, where students are classifying matters based on observable physical and chemical properties that it is catering to. At the same time, competency 2.2, here they are describing how electricity works through manipulating different elements in the simple circuit. That is the major particular focus of this particular activity. That is, it tries to attain this competency 2.2, where the students are going to manipulate different elements in the simple circuit. Okay, and then competency 2, which speaks about formulating questions using scientific terminology, and competency 7.1, wherein they are going to communicate. So 6.2 and 7.1 will be, you will find again and again it is repeated in most of the activities. The reason behind that is we want the communication from the student, as this is an activity-based approach, at the same time constructive approach which we are following when we are talking about this particular activities. So major idea is here, the outcome is to classify materials as conductors and insulator. In fact, this conductor and insulator can be told to them this terminology at last by the teacher when they finish with the activity, so that all the particular things let them do on their own. So it can be a follow-up activity of the above itself. We have told them to draw simple circuit diagram. Similar case, you can start this activity. You can tell them to draw a simple circuit diagram, and you can take them very well in the lab. You can put them in a group. You can tell them to draw a circuit diagram, and after a circuit diagram, let them build a simple circuit. After showing you the circuit diagram, as most of the time it is done, draw later on a circuit diagram and let them build a simple circuit on that circuit diagram. Okay, using battery, wires, or LED bulb. And then you give an instruction to them to create a swap and a gap in the circuit, and then let them insert one by one test items inside this particular circuit, as you can see in this description. And once that is done, you can always provide them with a table, okay, like this table, okay, where they are putting different samples and they are trying to figure it out whether the bulb is glowing or not. And they are trying to write down the explanation why it may be. That is their own. This is just for reference. They can write the explanation. So you try to figure it out through that particular explanation what reasoning might be going in the minds of the student when they try to test this particular sample. So that is what is much more important to us, because we are also trying to figure it out what is going inside the minds of the student through this particular activity. So with that, let the student try to identify material and let them try to separate the material, whether the bulb is glowing or not, into two types. Whether it glows, let them make it as one category. Whether the bulb doesn't glow, that can be another category. Let them differentiate that, let them classify that, and you can just give them a push and tell them to think about a particular definition or a terminology which you can give it to this particular set of substances or set of samples which are basically where they find the bulb is glowing and the set of substance where the bulb is not blue. Let them try to come up with a unique words, whatever they try to come up with that. And finally, you can try to disclose the real names of that particular group, that is conductors and insulator. So in that way, it will become much more exciting, wherein you are not disclosing directly the names. Instead, you are giving them opportunity to first think, let them give a particular name to that particular set of items, and then you are trying to tell what is basically the correct naming for that particular set. So this basically gives them an opportunity to explore, to basically communicate with you, to infer, and at the same time, you will also understand what they have understood through this particular activity when they are carrying it out. So rationale behind this activity, what is going on in the minds of the student, also you will understand through this particular activity. So you can also tell them on the next day, or if they have certain items on the previous day, also you can tell them to bring certain household item which they can test through this particular circuit. So this is related to activity number 5, where we have seen exploring conductors and insulator. The 6th activity is basically talking about measuring distance and time in daily life. Now, it may be very simple to set a certain particular group of students, but it is very important when it comes to a lesson wherein we try to learn about a concept of something called as time period, amplitude, frequency. Do that particular calculation. Often there are mistakes with respect to the units or maybe the conversion from seconds to hours or minutes. So therefore, this particular activity is put in a way it will help teacher in a course of time, and they are going to take that particular concept to so that the student will have previously the idea during the bridge course related to this particular part of conversion. Therefore, this particular activity is specifically put. This particular activity is again touching upon curricular goals 1, curricular goal 2, curricular goal 6, curricular goal 7, and from curricular goal 1, it is catering to competency 1.3, that is measures and uses standard units. That's where this activity is much more focused than 2.1, and then 6.2 and 7.3 as usual, which we have seen in the previous activity also, where they are going to try to formulate basically the idea behind that and to explore through the particular, they are going to infer. So that is what we are trying to do through this activity. So here, what basically teacher is going to do is, it is very simple. First, teacher will just brief them about a concept of distance and time for a certain time. Okay, and then have a discussion, instead of telling them, have a discussion on different SI units of distance and also the time. Here we have taken only 2 things, distance and time, taking that for time period or frequency or amplitude, this particular thing will count. That for that particular reason, these 2 things have been taken. And then you try to put certain like this on the board, let them try to understand that. And then after that, you can present them this particular observation table or maybe this worksheet. Okay, you can either give it to them or they can just take one particular paper and draw this particular table. So this particular table will have certain conversions, that is distance in kilometer, distance in meter, distance in centimeter. So the blank spaces that they need to fill. This may be very few examples which have been mentioned here. You can always extend this particular examples which have been mentioned here, so that they will get a lot of practice related to particular conversion of units, and specifically the distance, and the next one is of time. Okay, so that they are much more familiar with this particular conversion, and in course of time, when they are going to learn about that particular concept, they will not face any difficulty related to the conversion. Okay, and with that, if you have time, you can also go one step further, wherein you can just give them a simple pendulum bob, and you can ask students to measure the time required for 10 to 20 oscillation. You need to tell them about oscillation at start, and then let them measure the time. if time permits for the activity, you can very well do this particular activity, so that in the course of time when you are talking a concept, pendulum or maybe time period frequency, this will be helpful for you. So worksheet, which basically they are going to fill and complete. When you try to analyze that, you will understand whether they have understood this particular concept of conversion or maybe related to distance and time properly or not. That will be the assessment part. Most of the time, assessment is observation schedule, which basically gives you an idea what basically is the level of a particular student and how much he has understood a concept in a previous class and is ready for a next particular grade in my subject. That's how the idea is all thought of in this particular activity design. Now comes the another activity, that is activity 7, which talks about changes around us. Again, it caters to the CG1. Along with that, it caters to CG6 and CG7. In CG6, it caters to competency 6.2. And again, in CG7, it caters to competency 7.1. And as mentioned, it is here. In CG1, it caters to one, that is competency 1.2, where it identifies and differentiates types of changes. Okay, specifically on that particular C1.2, where we are focusing on whether the students are trying to, whether they have understood about this types of changes and whether they have thoroughly understood the concept of changes, because it is very much essential when we are continuing in grade 7 and we are trying to teach them a concept related to physical changes and chemical changes. Much of the time, there is a confusion in the minds of the students. So to ease that particular task, we have done this particular activity purposely has been put inside this particular bridge course. So you'll find in the first step, the teacher will demonstrate a very few simple changes in the classroom. Okay, these are just a suggestive. 2 examples are given. Many examples you can have like this. Okay, so just to have a discussion, don't directly start with the activity. First, try to give them a brief idea, let them engage, and then you start with the activity. So that is what is the whole idea that is followed in this particular bridge course preparation. First, engagement, wherein you are just curious questions or maybe you are having a discussion at start, and then you are trying to give them certain time to explore. Then you are again giving them certain time to explain. Then you are going to elaborate or facilitate, and then you are going to. So that is what file model is used in this particular activity designing. Okay, so here you'll find that student will observe and record the changes as per the worksheet which is provided observation table, and then students will classify the changes as reversible and irreversible changes. Since they have learned it in the previous grade, this is directly it is put, so that we are trying to test whether they have understood the concept well in the grade 6, what they have learned. Okay, and then to that, another particular thing that is added, wherein we try to also see whether the students try to mention whether the changes which they have seen in that new substance is formed, or whether the change can be reversed. So this is very important when it comes to physical change or maybe chemical change. This becomes a linkage in that particular context, and that's why this particular specifically this table is put. Okay, so the above table and this table is having a link in that particular context, and this will help basically to make a connection with the concept of physical change and chemical change. And when you are going to observe the changes and what students are writing into on the worksheet, that will be the assessment part. Okay, and also you can give them extended task wherein they can just list reversible and irreversible changes from their surrounding. So that will become a page. You can go on adding more particular type of changes here, so that depending on your class size, so that there is no much repetition which is followed. Okay, so everywhere you can go on adding your own examples. It is not fixed or limited to this only example. These are given as a suggested example so that you can think on a similar line and you can develop a more number of changes or samples. You can put it inside this particular activities, all activities. Then comes activity 8, which speaks about materials and their properties. It again caters to CG1 along with that CG6 and CG7, the same one like above, that is classification, and again related to formulating question and using scientific vocabulary. Okay, so here you'll find that we are much more interested in identifying different materials used in everyday life. Okay, and trying to classify that materials based on their properties, which they have previously learned in 6th standard. Okay, that is hardness and transparency. And then let them observe, compare, and record the properties. Okay, using a simple table that is given below. So here your role is only as a guide. You are going to just guide, identify different properties of the substances, and basically the substances like objects made up of wood, metal, plastic, glass, cloth, that type of things. Them and two properties here we are trying to cater. One is hardness and another one is transparency. Okay. So in certain cases, wherever the material is not possible to bring into the classroom, pictures can also be shown to the student, and then student try to basically separate this particular, try to note their particular response in this particular format. These are certain items which are given. Many items can be added to that, and this basically clears in our mind whether they have basically understood a concept of this particular materials and their properties related to hardness or transparency, which is much more needed in a course of time in grade 7 when they are going to learn a concept. Okay, with that, some 2 questions are given just for suggestive questions. In that, more number of questions also can be added, or you can have a discussion why only certain items are hard, or why only certain items are transparent, or certain items are opaque. There can be a discussion. That can also be, you can do it in a classroom setup once you take this particular activity. The next activity which is there is something very interesting, which is reading a temperature using a thermometer. You know that previously also this particular topic was there as a part in grade 7 where we were actually doing this. Okay, same activity has been taken a little bit before in a bridge course, so that they are much more familiar with, again, just like the measurement, here also they are much more familiar with handling of the apparatus. So here specifically, if you see the CG, it is covering is CG1, CG6, CG7. Along with that, the new particular indicators is CG5. Okay, from that the competency 5.1, where they are applying their knowledge basically in their daily life, scientific knowledge in their daily life, and 1.3 competency, which speaks about major and uses of standard units. Okay, so here our main idea is identifying basically a tool which basically used to measure temperature. Along with that, you'll also find the next particular outcome which we are expecting from the student is they are trying to read and record temperature, okay, correctly from the thermometer, and at the same time comparing about the temperature of different substances. So these 3 things we are trying to figure it out through this particular activity. Okay, so laboratory thermometer is required. Again, this particular activity can be done in the laboratory with a group of students. That will be well for this particular task. Okay, so in the first step, you can provide a student, a group of students can be made, and each group can be given different samples, and they need to carefully place the thermometer in each sample and observe the reading. Okay, so give them a free hand, let them try to do it in their own way. So some will not put the thermometer properly, some will touch to the base, some will be touching the thermometer to the side, all that particular thing, let them happen. Because when that will happen, then only we can suggest them certain direction, and that they will remember up there in a sense, a proper way of handling apparatus in a course of time. If they don't commit a mistake, if we directly give them a procedure, it will become like a monotonous thing, and wherein they will just follow that particular thing as a formality, and then they will not remember the task, how it need to be done. So therefore, let them first give a free hand, wherein let them measure this particular temperature in their own. Okay, and then you can have a round and guide students and tell them what is the correct way to measure a particular temperature using a thermometer. So this is basically this sheet you can tell them to fill. Okay, instead of cold water, normal water, and warm water, is just given as suggestive samples. You can name the samples as A, B, and C, so that the comparison can be done properly, and they are not knowing what it is. Okay, so samples can be A, B, and C. that can be given to them. You can mix that samples and give it to them. Okay, and after that, you can give them a task wherein they will share their observation. So certain tasks we can give wherein they can share their observation in the class. So you can tell from this group, one person will be a recorder who will basically record and tell whatever they have observed in this particular case. So like that particular thing, the recorder will tell what this particular group has done and what they have observed in this particular activity. So like such particular ideas can be used when we are trying to do such activities. Okay. So wherein you'll find that student will explain in their own sample at the highest temperature, which sample at the lowest temperature, and how the thermometer has helped them to measure the temperature. So such particular activity always you'll find that observation from the teacher end will be one part of the assessment. At the same time, you are going to see in the observation, whenever you are observing, how they are handling the thermometer, how they are basically reading the temperature, and how the students are participating and recording and comparing the results. So it is only wherein you are going to get an idea of what particular group is doing with respect to the activity that is given to them. So that's the activity number 9, which speaks about reading temperature using a thermometer. The next activity is something called as food chain link game. This is a very interesting activity. Okay, and you know why it has been put, because in course of time they are going to understand the concept of food chain, food web. For that particular reason, this particular activity is given. Okay, so it caters to CG3, okay, and competency 3.3 in it, wherein they are going to analyze patterns of relationships between living organisms and their environment dependence and response to each other. That is the major particular competency which we are focusing in this particular case. And along with that, CG6 and CG7 from that competency 6.2 and competency 7.1. As I said, it will most of the activities, because we are not telling anything as a teacher. We are trying to figure it out from the students what they have understood into that particular activity. So therefore, this particular 2 CG's competencies, that is related to 7.1 and 6.2, they will always be seen in this particular activity. So here, what teacher is going to do is basically teacher is going to arrange a set of cards. Okay, so teacher is going to arrange a set of cards which will have a different particular plants. Okay, and which will have this particular cards to a group of students, like 4 you can take or 2, depending on your class size, and you can distribute this particular card to one person, cast them, let them using this card form a simple food chain. Okay, let them form a simple food chain and let them try to explain why basically they have put a particular line wherein if you see how simple food chain, it starts with plants, or basically then plants, then basically a little bit higher order. Why the plants have been placed first, why it has been done, let them try to figure it out, and then also try to connect this particular activity to the nutrition in organism. Okay, carnivores, omnivores. So that is a 2 way in which we are looking at it, so that we are also catering to that particular concept related to nutrition in plants and animals. So through this activity, we are trying to come up with this particular concept a little bit in month of April itself. So when we basically are going to take this particular concept related to nutrition, they are much more clear how it is returning. Okay. So assessment can be group presentation. That is, you can tell them to display this particular thing on that particular desk, and you can a group of students can have a walk around over there to see how they are arranged. So give 3 to 4 sets or maybe 5 sets, different particular food chain, and also you can make at last the extended activity wherein you can just come to a point wherein they are joining this different food chain and making a food web. That can be the extended part to this particular activity. Okay, these are certain questions just given for reference. Okay, this you can take as a discussion just to elicit the response from the student related to the nutrition. Okay, so that's why this particular activity has been put. And this is also for the same reason. This activity and table has been put. You can take very well response on this particular table. to understand the concept of nutrition in plants and animals. The next activity which follows is activity 11, which speaks about exploring the secrets of moving shadow. Here, it caters to this curricular goal 2 and at the same time curricular goal 4 or curricular 4, also curricular goal 6 and curricular goal 7. Okay, so here it specifically caters to the curricular goal and the competency 2.4 where it explains light and shadow. Okay, so it is related to light and shadow, and you know that this lesson continues still 12 standard, like shadow and reflection, and then it slowly and slowly goes on broadening. So that's why this activity is very important, and that's how it is placed, so that you understand properly, and we also get an idea as a teacher whether they understood concept of shadows properly or not. Okay, so here you can tell on the previous day itself the student to bring a torch. Okay, or you can provide them a torch and different materials like transparent, translucent material. And using this particular activity table, they can write their observations and what type of shadow they observe. Okay, whether they observe on for that particular thing that we need to they need to fill this particular observation table in that way. Okay, like object in front of the torch, what will happen? What is your observation? And what will be the shadow type? Transparent object in front of the torch, translucent object in front of the torch, object closer to the torch, what will happen? Object moved farther from the torch, what will happen to the shadow? Object tilted or rotated, object's color change, what will happen? So all these scenarios you need to give it. Okay, you can give this as a group activity to a group of 4 students and let them do this particular activity. After that, they will do this. After doing this activity, let them try to draw and discover what is the relationship between light, object, and shadow. Okay, so let that particular drawing, let them try to draw, and then you can have a little bit of discussion or what all things are needed to form a shadow, why basically shadow changes size with the distance, or whether the object color changes shadow. Such particular question as a facilitation asked very well with the student. Okay, so how basically students are doing the investigation, that is the activity, and whether they are able to identify the condition for of shadow formation and how accurately they are observing the and recording and drawing the diagram, that will be for the part of assessment for this particular activity. Mainly it is in the form of. So you'll find in most of the cases here, lengthy question and answers are not given. Instead, we are much more focused on observation, wherein we are seeing actually the students what they are doing when this particular activity is given to them in a classroom scenario. Then comes another environmental type of particular environmental awareness activity, which specifically put, and you know this particular activity is also very relevant with respect to grade 7 when it comes to when we are talking and teaching them about this concept of water, our lifetime. Okay, so this activity number 12, is water our lifetime from earth to sky and back. In this particular activity, we are much more concerned with respect to CP3 and competency 3.4, wherein it says extend the conditions to table pursuit sustaining life on Earth and other planets. So for that particular competency, this activity is in line. Okay. Along with that, other particular competencies like 5.1, 7.4 again basically is dealing with this particular activity. Okay, so in this particular activity, what is basically a thing is, it is a poster development activity or a chart development activity, wherein we are just trying to start a discussion or initiate a discussion first related to what is basically how much water is present on the earth, why do we require that, okay, what is rainwater, where does rainwater come from, all these particular basic questions you can pose, and after that you can give them a topic or to a group of students and let them develop a poster. Okay, maybe these other 2 topics which are given, much more topics which is related to sensitizing student over this particular topic, that is water, which is very important and we need to preserve it for a future generation. And therefore, on that particular topics, you can very well give them poster to draw. They will draw that particular poster and follow to that particular thing. The next step, you can give them this particular chart which they need to prepare in a group, because you are sensitizing now them properly. In the first case, they are generally drawing it as per their particular viewpoint. Now you are structuring their viewpoint by giving this particular things. Okay, specifically, and they are going to draw a pie chart, and they are going to develop in their mindset this particular test, this much only water is available for us to drink or maybe for daily use. That's how we are sensitizing them to this particular activity. And then in the extended case, maybe this is what we can do. You can tell them again to draw water cycles. Okay, this can be a group activity wherein we are going to connect this particular thing to a water cycle, and we are much more focused on the process of evaporation, condensation, precipitation, collection, which basically is a very important part in the water cycle. And then all this particular thing can be presented by the student. Okay, so poster presentation can happen in a classroom, and then they can tell what ideas basically they have used when they have tried to develop this particular poster. So looking at a poster or chart, that is a major idea in this particular activity. The next one is the touch, observe, and classify fiber. This is related to a lesson called as fiber to fabric. You know that this is having a vertical mobility. This lesson, okay, again in the 7th standard also you find such concepts. So to make them aware of this particular concept, what basically is related to this different types of fiber, and you often have seen that when we go to buy a certain cloth item in a particular cloth shop, we often face this particular difficulty. We just touch, but we don't understand whether it is actually a cotton or maybe a polyester. So to develop that particular idea, whether it is a cotton or maybe a polyester or maybe whatever it is, we have this particular activity wherein they are going to touch, observe, and they are going to classify this fiber properly in a real sense. Again, this touch upon the CGs 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, in that major focus is on competency 1.1, which basically says about classifying matters based on observable physical and chemical properties. That is one which basically we are looking at into when it comes to this particular activity. So here in the first step, just initiate a discussion. Let them try to understand why cotton is compatible, why we need not wear polyester as during the basically which particular cloth they try to prefer wearing, or during the winter season what dress they try to wear. So such discussion you can start at start. Then what you can do is you can tell student 1 day prior to bring small fiber or fabric. Rather than fabric samples, you can tell them to bring it from home. Okay, and let them try to observe this particular sample. Put them in a group. Okay, group activity it is once again. Put them in a group. Let them observe it properly, and let them paste this fiber sample in this particular way in this particular chart. And let them try to figure it out what is the fiber sample is all about, whether it is cotton, wool, silk, polyester, what it is, or polycot or whatever it is. Let them try to identify the source of it. Let them try to feel the texture, whether it is soft, rough, smooth, what is the appearance, whether it is shiny or dull, and let them classify whether it is natural or synthetic in their own particular way. And finally, you can ask, you can have this particular chart displayed in the classroom and let the student group present their classification, why they have put it in this particular case, or why they feel that texture, appearance is of that particular sense. Why that particular sense is made to that particular group. That can be explained to a whole class by that group of students. Okay, so here assessment is basically you can prepare a checklist and you can see whether a student has done a correct classification, accurate description of texture, or whether the chart which they have prepared is neat, or whether the group participation is proper in this particular context. That could be a part which can be looked into when we have particular activity. Okay, then comes the second last activity that speaks about how do we separate materials at home. Okay, again caters to CG1, CG5, CG6, and CG7. So here also a classification plays a very crucial role. Here what can be done in a similar way, don't activity, ask certain question to engage a class, and after that try to give them this particular activity of sorting. Okay, so you can give them pictures. Okay, you can give them a set of pictures and a table like this, wherein actions what they do that need not be mentioned, Okay, that student need to fill. Examples, you can give it. Either you can show it or you can write a set of examples. Okay, so that examples, students are basically writing it. Okay, and then they are discussing. It can be think, pair, and share can be used between the two. They can it can be done or in a group of 4 also you can do it, and then they are writing what action is preferable in that particular context. For separating rice and stew, what is possible? For basically grain and husk, what is possible? The way in which they need to separate. We don't want here actual terminology of teaching, then sieving like that. The basic idea is to make them aware of the actions which we do, and then we can correlate when this particular concept comes into picture. So with this, what we can do is, this is one very interesting thing which we can do is gallery walk, wherein each group will display whatever they have written, whatever actions they have written on a table, and all the group in a class will have a walk around, okay, over each other's particular table, and they will try to see what they have written for that particular example. So such particular thing can be done for this particular activity. Okay. So this is assessment, again the observation part, how the student participate, how they group logically, how they try to recall the daily practices will be the first and foremost part of this particular activity. The last activity speaks about something called as observe, touch, and draw a flower. Here it is mostly catering later on to the different parts of the flower. When we teach concept related to self-pollination, cross-pollination, or pollination. So here the competency again, which it caters is competency 1, 3, 6, 7. So in that 3.1 competency is much more focused here, wherein the student describes the diversity of living things observed in the natural surrounding. Okay, so here what basically instructions need to be given to the student is directly you don't start again, have a discussion, okay, and on the previous day you can tell them to bring different types of flowers or maybe discuss, okay, and one flower per group can be given as a hands-on observation, okay. It need not be each individual bringing it, one flower per group is enough, okay, and then student will touch it, smell it, observe the color, shape, and parts of that. Okay, let student take time, around 15 to 20 minutes to do this particular thing. Okay, and if they want, they can separate also the parts if possible. That freedom can be given to them. Okay, and then teacher will ask the question, and they will tell them to point it at circle part, green leaf like part, long thin part inside, central thicker part like this, and the student will try to dissect it and try to show it to the teacher. Okay, at this particular time, don't directly tell them the names. That will be the last part when you are going to do it. In the step 4, they are just going to draw that particular part. Okay, and in the case, what they are going to do is they are there. Your role, wherein you are going to tell them what are these particular parts. So that is all about this particular activity. All activities are actually, if you read it, you will understand it with respect to the activities which are there. So these 15 activities which are there, you need to cover it in the month of April for grade 7. That's all for our end. Thank you, Arjun. Any question? 1 or 2 questions?
You can unmute your mic and ask the questions. We just take a few questions.
Google form link is here.
Google form link has been shared. You can mark your attendance on the Google form.
Please don't write your names in the chat. Already the Google form link has been shared. Just see again it has been put. Okay. Just try to record your attendance through the Google form link.